Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about the events going on in court in the Paul Flores case during the first week of September 2022. As a reminder, Paul Flores and his father Ruben Flores are in court, Paul accused of the murder of Kristin Smart, who went missing 26 years ago, and Ruben Flores for helping Paul to cover up the crime. Our first witness on September the 2nd was Detective Clint Cole. Hooverall for the prosecution asked him, "Did you interview Angie Carousel on September the 17th, 2021? Yes, and as a reminder, this was Paul Flores' ex-girlfriend who we heard from last week. And during the interview, which was undertaken via a phone call, we heard that Paul and Ruben Flores redirected her away from the avocado tree, which was in the backyard of Ruben's house. The interview was undertaken via a phone call and we heard a recording of it, and Angie was saying, "They were just like, oh no, come this way, get out, let's go. No, you can't go over there, let's go." Under cross-examination, Harold Messick for Ruben asked, "Were you aware that Angie and Paul were engaged to be married?" And he responded by saying, "My understanding is that they were just dating." And that was pretty much it for Clint Cole. Our second witness for the day was Sarah Doe, and due to the details of her testimony, I'll keep using this moniker, which isn't her real name, and a caution at this point, there are some strong sexual themes which are mentioned. So Hooverall stood up for the prosecution first. "Miss Doe, did something happen to you around the spring of 2011? Yes. Are you familiar with a bar called Crimson? Yes, it's in the old town part of San Pedro. And there were some photos shown of the bar as it is today." So Sarah Doe testified how she went to the bar with a friend in spring 2011. It was a weeknight and there were maybe 6 people there, and one of them was Paul Flores. She identified Paul Flores in the courtroom, and Hooverall prompted her, "Did you see him looking at you?" And yes, she did. Every time I would look up, I would notice him looking in our direction. "Did he approach you?" And this is interesting. She said that she went outside to take a cigarette break with a friend, but when they came back in, he was seated closer to their seats. And tellingly, Hooverall asked her, "What did you do with your drinks when you went outside for a cigarette?" "We left them on the bar," Sarah responded. Apparently towards the end of the night they went outside, and when they did, Paul was right behind them. Her friend kind of motioned and said, "He's behind you." "I turned around and he was right there," she said. We heard that Sarah had had maybe 4 or 5 drinks over 4 hours. "What happened around closing time?" Hooverall asked. "Well, a fight broke out, so we were kind of pushed out of the bar, and that's around the time that I don't really remember a lot of things." She can't remember how she got her friends home, for example. "And what's the next thing you remember?" Well, she said she pretty much remembers being in front of a house. "I remember seeing a white car. I recognised the street because I had friends growing up who lived around there," she said. "Do you remember the street?" "Upland," was the response. So the next thing she remembers is walking into the house and looking around. A lot of things were piled up, and this is Paul Flores' house, by the way. The things were piled up almost like hoarding. I was kind of shocked at how many things were in there. He went into the kitchen to get me a drink. "Do you remember what the drink was?" "No, I don't. I don't think it was alcoholic," she responded. "Did you drink it?" "I believe so, yes." And the next bit is hard. What happened next? Hooverall asked, and she says she just remembers going in and out of it, and then we were in his bedroom. He was on top of me, and at this point she's emotional, she's crying, and a few of the jurors are also using tissues as well. This is a very highly charged moment in court. "What was he doing?" "He was penetrating me." And there were a few more questions which established that it was full S that was going on, and I'm going to keep away from the details. "Were you okay with this?" she was asked. "No, I was confused." "Did you consent to this?" "No." "What happened next?" she was asked. "Well, it went on for a while, and at one point I wanted to go into the shower to wake myself up. I just remember flashes," she said. "What happened in the shower?" More S. "With your consent?" "No, I was still pretty confused." We then heard how Paul tried to gag her with a red ball with straps like a S toy. He kept trying to shove it into my mouth, and I was saying no and screaming, but he kept trying. "I couldn't breathe," she said. Apparently he gave up and stopped trying to gag her. Then the next exchange was when she said she woke up with the sunlight and immediately began to get dressed and leave silently. Flores woke up and followed her to the front door. Was anything said? And Sarah responded, when I got to the front door I told him, when someone tells you no, no means no. Too damn right. Apparently Paul just looked down and said okay, and at which point Sarah walked away. We heard that Sarah had bruises on her arms and legs, her shoulders and thighs, and was really sore for a few days. Paul had tried to contact her a couple of times after that. He texted me a day or two later, and her response was, I think I just said, leave me alone. Apparently she also saw him at Crimson again sometime later, and when she did, she told a friend, I want to leave. In her interview with SLO Sheriff's Detective Clint Cole in June of 2021, she'd identified Paul Flores from a photo lineup, as well as a photo of his car and his house. Did you see the person who did this to you in that lineup? She was asked. I did, she responded. At this point, a juror actually asked for a break in proceedings. So for the defence, we had Robert Sanger up first, who is Paul's attorney, and he said, so that's about 10 years after the incident you described. And yes, it was. You didn't report it to law enforcement at the time. Correct. And Sanger then said, and then 10 years later, you saw on the news that Paul Flores was a person of interest in the Kristin Smart case. She responded, yes. And you spoke to LA law enforcement in September of 2020. I don't remember the exact month, but the year, yes. He pointed out that almost every picture on her Facebook account throughout 2011 involved her drinking alcohol. I had just started going to bars for the first time that year, she responded. There was also a photo on Facebook where Sanger had said, you posted this picture of some bruising as a result of some drinking incident you had. And Sarah responded, with my family members, yes. A bruise to your back, right? No, that's my knee, she said. I reckon I could tell a back from a knee. Sanger kept pushing at this with questions like, a big part of your life was going out and getting drunk, right? And just to paint the pictures, some jurors were shaking their heads during this line of questioning. Sanger asked her about the podcast. Did you see that there was one? I heard about it. I know that people have heard it. So you knew what the Kristin Smart disappearance was all about, right? And she said that she saw it on social media, yes. I think what Sanger is trying to do is to suggest that she had this incident many years ago, and in the intervening time she saw Paul Flores and the Kristin Smart case being publicised and put the two things together, 2 and 2 making 5 essentially. And we had DA investigator JT Camp back on stand again. All that was established really was the distance from Paul Flores' house to Crimson was approximately 1.7 miles. The next day we had witness Shelby Liddell, who is a forensic specialist, take the stand. She described what happened on March the 15th, 2021, when investigators began excavating in several locations at Ruben Flores' house, and her job was to photograph and collect any potential evidence from those investigations, as she put it. So, at a site that was labelled Grid 1 Excavation 2 on the court document, Liddell said that about 2 foot down in the dirt, detectives started noticing changes in the colour of the soil that looked like staining. She collected a sample of the interior part of the staining using a trowel. Now, samples of the stain, which archaeologist Cindy Arrington previously testified was likely from human remains, was collected as evidence and subsequently subjected to test for human blood and DNA. She also collected control samples of soil from various parts of the property, including under the deck, to ensure the samples from the stain could be accurately tested. She was back at the house again a few weeks later on April the 13th, 2021 to collect more samples. She explained on that day, as they dug, i.e. the investigators, staining began to show up in new quadrants A and B, then quadrant D, then quadrant C. I focused on the darker edges of the stain and tried to collect as much as I could and put it in a container, she testified. We also heard about a cargo trailer that was parked alongside Ruben Flores' house before it was seized at around that time, on April the 21st. When they searched it, apparently it was cluttered, filled with items such as tools, boxes, paperwork, filing cabinets, etc., etc. It was taken to the sheriff's office to be further searched for evidence. So after taking some photos, they cleared the floor and applied a chemical known as Blue Star, which lights up blue when it comes into contact with human blood. And a positive reaction was observed. We heard that apparently Blue Star can give false positives, for example when it comes in contact with a cleaning chemical such as bleach. But it is different. It's a quick bright flash, more white than blue, Liddell testified. The reaction is not considered direct evidence itself. It is used as a presumptive to narrow down the search for collection for further testing, she said. So a 3-foot section of the plywood floor of the trailer and some screws from the area were actually cut out. This was then sent for further testing. After lunch we had cross-examination and Robert Sanger questioned her about her credentials. He was asking her somewhat denigrating type questions like, so your job is basically to collect evidence? And to that question Liddell responded, I document, collect and process it. And Sanger then said, and you said that you now have a rapid DNA machine at the SLO Sheriff's Office which basically looks like a big computer. I would say it looks like a big typewriter, but nobody knows what that is. Now he laughs at this point, but the jurors don't, they look deadly serious. A badly misplaced joke by Mr. Sanger. He also established that Liddell was there to take some photographs of some substantial excavations out in Huasna, but nothing associated with Kristin Smart was found. We then got into some nitpicking about the meaning of certain words. So Sanger was asking her, you've been calling it a stain. What kind of stain is it? And she responded, it's a clear discoloration of the soil. What about the deck? Was there any evidence that the deck had ever been tampered with? That's beyond the scope of my expertise. And Sanger responded, well, you're an evidence technician? Sanger then asked, if the theory is that a body was buried there and then dug back up, don't you think that the staining would be below that level? Liddell told him and the jurors that she didn't have any knowledge about how soil staining occurs, and that's why the anthropologists were called in. There were some jury questions at this time about whether the digging equipment was cleaned between sample collections. Yes, they were. Mesick for Ruben Flores asked Liddell about the condition of the ground under the deck before any digging started. Do you remember the condition of the ground? Notice any depressions, mound? And Liddell said it was relatively even. He also asked about the difference between staining and discoloration, and on being shown a photo of a stain, she said that the largest section is a stain and the different colours in the middle of the stain were discolorations. We also heard from Liddell that no bones, teeth or hair were found at any of the excavation sites she examined, including the sites at the Flores home, 3 in Huasna and 1 in rural Arroyo Grande. And Sanger asked her whether any semi-permeable wraps were found, and this is probably referring to the prosecution's theory that Smart was wrapped in some kind of semi-permeable wrap while buried, and therefore any bones, teeth, hair, etc. would have been taken when those were de-interred. And that was it for the day. Our first witness the next day was Springer, a criminologist. So in May 21, Springer had received an evidence package from the St. Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office, which contained 3 tape lifts and a hairbrush. The tape lift is putting evidence onto a flat surface so that it can be looked at under a stereo microscope. When looked at, some fibres were seen, some blue, some red, some brown, black and some lighter coloured ones. Some appeared to be cotton and some synthetic, but Springer didn't know what type. Well, Sanger then steps in. May I approach to see what the witness is reading from? I'm not sure we have those. And Pouvril immediately responded, they were provided over a year ago. This is not the only time Sanger has not been aware of evidence in his folders provided by the prosecutors. So Sanger then pushed with his theory about the twine. His first question was, so this little collection of things you looked at, they were consistent with fibres you would expect to find around a construction site or house? They could be, for sure, was the response. Sanger also established that normally these kinds of reviews are done for comparison with known clothing fibres, etc., but there was no comparison that was done in this case. He wasn't provided with a comparison source to test, and no, he wasn't. So then Sanger takes out a brand new roll of pink mason twine, and this was the same roll he showed to the contractors last week. "What kind of fibre is that?" "It says braided nylon," Springer responded. No, it couldn't have been one of the fibres Springer reviewed because it's pink and not red. But it is possible for the colours of the fibres to fade over time, and that depends on how pigmented they are and what elements they're exposed to. Sanger publishes a photo of detectives near the excavation site in April 2021. "It looks like a gentleman wearing blue jeans is over there. Could his clothing have contributed fibres? Sure, but it's looking like the soil's pretty gone already by this photo." Defence attorney Harold Mesick then took his turn, and whilst being somewhat obsequious, I think his approach was far better than Sanger's. He said, "In honour of your impending retirement after 50 years in the field, I'm just going to ask you one question. Mr. Pooverell asked you if you could assign any significance to this minuscule amount of trace evidence. You said no." And Springer responded, "I cannot assign significance." Mesick then responded, "That's all I have, and bon voyage." Sanger made a really weird comment that I can't get my head round. He said, "I think I've run out of ectoplasm, so I'll just sit down. We have a juror question. Can you explain the difference between how synthetic and natural fibres look?" They look different in their size and shape, and that was it. Our second witness for the day was Jennifer Hudson. We learned that in the summer of 1996, when Kristin Smart disappeared, she was 17 years old and lived in Huasna, a rural community outside of Arroyo Grande. We were straight into it. Jennifer said that Flores told her he had killed Smart and buried her body at his place in Huasna while they were hanging out at a skate house in 1996, and this was shortly after Kristin Smart went missing. "Even after decades, his eyes are what made me believe it wasn't a joke," she testified. "There was nothing alive behind his eyes." This all took place while she, her boyfriend's friend, and Paul Flores were in the backyard of a house that had a patio with 2 couches and a skate ramp. They were listening to the radio at that time, and on the radio there were advertisements asking for help in locating Kristin Smart, and these would play quite often. After one of these ads, Jennifer said that Flores told her that B.ch was a D.kt. "I was done playing with her, and I put her, or buried her, under my place in Huasna." Flores' demeanour when he said this was cold. No smirk, no smile, no tone of "I'm being funny" or some distorted sense of humour, she said. Flores' eyes were described as being like a dead person's eyes. He was 1000% serious, she said, and she was frightened and left just minutes later. She hadn't told the police because she was just a scared 17-year-old kid, she said. She told of another incident where she and some friends were going to a skate park, and her acquaintances told her to follow a four-wheel drive vehicle. When they stopped and she got out of the car, so did the driver of the white pickup truck, which was Paul Flores. "As soon as I saw him, I felt ill," she said. "I vomited." This shook her up so badly that she immediately got back in her car and left, and the people she'd dropped off ended up walking home. It wasn't for several years that she told anyone about her encounters with Flores, and then in 2002 she was living with her boyfriend and she confided in him. This prompted her boyfriend Justin then to submit an anonymous tip about the conversation. She was then urged by her boyfriend to contact Chris Lambert, the author of Your Own Backyard podcast, about the Kristin Smart disappearance. They eventually met, and Chris and Jennifer managed to recreate the trip where she had followed Paul Flores. So, under cross-examination, Sanger essentially accused Jennifer of saying what she did in order to claim the reward on the case. Her boyfriend Justin allegedly sent her a Facebook message telling her something to the effect of making her best show in order to get the reward, which was meant for the people who helped solve the Smart case. And she doesn't remember that message anyway. "If it exists," she said, then there has to be more context because it's offensive at the end of the day. Fair point. Sangha at this point started to look for cell phone records between Jennifer and, I assume, Justin, her boyfriend, and Chris Lambert to try to pursue this in it for the reward scenario. However, not for the first time in this trial, Sangha couldn't find these records, and so at this point the trial was wrapped up for the day, and indeed wrapped up for the weekend. Jennifer will return on Monday. So that is it. I hope you found this informative, and if you have, please hit that subscribe button, and if you hit the notification bell, you won't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.